you'll be okay. But I remember as a kid, when that hose went in that pool, it went down over the shallow end and laid right out across the pool, and they had it on full force. Well, 3-inch line. And so us kids, when my dad wasn't looking, would go down into the pool. There was no water in this area because it was still filling up, but this water stream is shooting out across this nice, slick, white surface. And so we'd come out and we would straddle that hose and walk out to the end and drop down into the stream and shoot us out across the pool. Now, my brothers were a bunch of little blonde-haired kids. If you can imagine these little blonde-haired kids, one at a time, shooting out across the pool there. And we had great fun until my dad saw us. And he told us how much we could break a leg or something. And we said, sure, Dad, okay. August 9th, 1960. We were all asleep, 1:30 in the morning. There's a pounding on our door. It's the caretaker who lives in the apartment in the bathhouse, and he's pounding on the door and says, Rufus, quick, get up, the bathhouse is on fire. And my mom yanked us out of bed and says, come here to the window, look, you'll never see anything like this again. And there's flames leaping into the air. We can see it across the field. And my dad pulls on some pants and his undershirt, and off he goes. The bathhouse, 2/3 of the bathhouse burned down that night. My dad tells a story about how the volunteer fire department arrived first, and the one guy is there with the nozzle, and they're hooking up the hose to the hydrant. Now the hydrant is up on Matthews; it's not down there by the pool, so they have to keep unrolling hoses and go up there and connect up because they still hadn't extended the city water everywhere where it needed to be, particularly with fire hydrants. And so the one guy is there, he's ready to douse this fire and everything, and minutes go by, more minutes go by, more minutes go by. Finally another fireman comes up with the other end of the hose, says, where do I put this? And so finally the city fire department came, and they had a pumper truck, and they threw a hose into the lake, and they were able to draw water out of that, and because of that they were able to salvage enough of the building, mostly the women's side, that the whole building didn't burn. That next morning, you have to know my dad. He could be as discouraged as can be, but he's always looking at what do we need to do now. And so he got a big stake bed truck, sent one of his men up to Indianapolis and said, I want you to go get as many men as you can, casual labor, get as many men as you can. They brought back 25 men, and they started working on pulling all the burnt stuff out of the building, piling it up, cleaning out the building, getting things ready, and by 6 p.m. the next day, Longacre was open again. Now, my dad said, unfortunately, due to news reports, people thought everything at Longacre had burned to the ground. There were reports that the bathhouse burned down, the diving tower had burned down, the pool had burned down. But he said it was a slow rest of the summer. But they were back in business, like I said, by 6 p.m. that next day. That winter, my dad decided that was never going to happen again. And they built a concrete structure. And I remember that as a child, that building being built, because he would have to go down there at night and keep these 55-gallon drums with fires in them burning underneath that concrete to keep it from freezing in the middle of the wintertime before the concrete's set up. So they built that concrete building all during the winter of 1961. Took 3 days to fill the pool. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? The pool was 1,200,000 gallons. Yeah. Let me think here. The company picnics. I told you a little bit about that. One of the memories I have is on the north side picnic area, there were groups that had picnics there where they would do a tug of war. And they put some guys on one of the islands and some people on the mainland, and they'd have a tug of war. And as kids, we thought that was just the coolest thing. there was like 35 men on each side. This wasn't like the little kids are having a tug of war. These are, all these guys at these company picnics, and they're having this tug of war, and they're fighting this thing out. I see them scraping along the ground, and eventually one side pulls the other side all the way into the lake and through the mud and everything else. And we loved the company picnics because as kids, we rode around on our bicycles afterwards and collected Coke bottles. Because it's hard for us to remember that 2 or 3 cents for a Coke bottle was a lot of money. And, my dad, he was a little bit tight with the money when it came to us kids. Son, you want some money? Well, I've got some work. And so my first job was picking up litter on the beach at Longacre Park. And I hated that job because you had to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to get it done, because it had to be done by 8:30 because the park opened at 9 o'clock. But it was a job. And I remember that as a kid, I saved those quarters and half dollars or whatever it was. I talked a little bit about the lifeguards. I became a lifeguard right before our family moved to Florida and sold the place last summer. That was 1972. And I remember lifeguards, it all looks glamorous, but there are some times when it's not so glamorous. I remember there was a call came in, somebody's kid did not come home, and the pool had closed, and so we had to do a physical search of the deep end. Now, after 7,000 people go through that pool with suntan oil on, the water isn't clear anymore. Even though the filtration system filtered the pool water completely every 8 hours. It was an amazing system. It had gravel and sand and these great big railroad car tanks in that filter building there. And then after it went through there, it went into a pool inside that building where they shot it with chlorine gas. Now, we would never use chlorine gas today because of how toxic it is. There were 2 times my dad was overcome by chlorine gas, and they think that it may have had been some of the cause for some of his neurological difficulties later in life, because it affects the brain and all kinds of stuff. Now we use pellets and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, we went to search, and so we physically had to dive down. The deep end was about 13, 14 feet deep. You had to dive down and physically feel the bottom of the line of lifeguards. And I can still remember doing that, scared to death I was going to find something. And I go down there, and the guy next to me, he must have hit a towel or something on the bottom, but he hit something down there, and all I could do is hear him screaming as he came up to the top. And we all came up, what? He goes, it's nothing. But it was one of the kind of the adventures that happened down there. The lifeguards were amazing people. The one I knew best was Paul Velez. Paul was the wrestling coach at Indiana Central for many, many years, and a remarkable guy. And he kept all the young bucks in line. He was a fun guy, but he didn't take any nonsense. Ran a great program. I learned to swim from him. Sometimes after work, the lifeguards would come back to pool and sneak back in and go skinny dipping. One time my dad heard him over there catting around in the pool area, and he knew them all. And he carried a pistol with him at night when he was doing the rounds. And so they're out there, all of them butt naked in the pool there and carrying on, and he takes his pistol out and fires about 4 rounds into the air. Well, all you could hear is, he said, all you could hear is splashing and scrambling and screaming. And everybody's saying, hey, Roof, it's us, don't shoot, don't shoot. Paul Velez was also kind of the enforcer around there. Every once in a while, some guys would get into fights or want to pick a fight with the lifeguards. And there was one day when there were about 10 guys that decided that Paul was the guy they were going to take on. And they didn't know who Paul was. And he said, boys, he says, I'm not against fighting. He says, we'll do it over there, but only one rule. I'll take you on one at a time. Well, within 10 minutes, there were 10 guys laying on the ground, holding their heads, holding their stomach, everything else. He says, boys, you're welcome to come back in the pool, but there's not going to be any fighting. So that's how discipline was enforced around Longacre. Paul was really good at that kind of stuff. How many people rode the slide at Longacre? How many people wore out a swimsuit on a slide? I wore one out one time and didn't realize that it was worn out as I was strutting around the pool. You all probably have stories like that too. The refreshment stands, same menu pretty much year after year. My mom was the enforcer there. We aren't going to serve poor quality stuff. So my dad got the hot dogs from Weber Meats. They were a top quality hot dog. You always got good stuff there. If you got popcorn, there was one way to do the popcorn. You filled it all the way up with the lids of the box up, all the way up, and then you smashed it in. The idea was you were going to get a full box of popcorn. Candy bars, all the rest of the stuff. One other thing I remember, it's hard to imagine that at a place like that, there were people that didn't have swimming suits, and so they rented swimming suits. Hard to imagine today, but that's what happened. Now, at the end of every day, swimming suits had to be washed and they had to be dried and got ready for the next day. Well, somewhere along the way, my dad convinced my mom, said, now, if you'll wash the swimming suits, I'll get you a brand new automatic washing machine. So we were one of the families with an automatic washing machine before many people had one, but there was that caveat to that and my mom would be washing swimming suits. I remember one other job I had was to count the quarters and nickels and pennies in the office after a busy Sunday. And we learned how to do a lot of stuff in this business. My dad said, now whatever you do in here, you don't tell anybody what you do in here. I guess it's okay to tell you now. And so when we got the money all done, he would stack it in the back corner of the bathroom. He called it the cabbage corner. And at the end of the day, all the day's proceeds would go into a galvanized bucket, and he would put a cloth over it and put his German Luger pistol on top of that, in the bucket, and he'd take it for the night deposit. And my dad always thought someday he's going to get robbed. Now, he never did get robbed, but he was prepared. But I still remember that. I go, Dad, what's in the bucket? He says, well, the proceeds. I took the cover off one time. I go, Dad, there's a gun in here. And he goes, yes, there is. This is Longacre, obviously before the interstate, which puts it pre-1960s. You can see this is Lick Creek right along here. This is the pond, or the lake, the rowboat lake where they had rowboats. This was picnic area. I remember playing many games of baseball out in this area. There is the bathhouse, the original one that burned down. The parking area up here, and additional picnic grounds. The trestle where the railroad train went over is right here. That kind of gives you a little bit of background. Next one. Back up one. Now you see that little house right there? That's the same house there. Okay? This is what they said was the old swimming hole. It's not quite, but it's close. Okay? This little building here, when we switch to the next slide, you'll see it. But you can see it's farm ground all through here. This was the low ground, the flood ground. Go to the next one, please. And you can see that little building back there. So it was roughly close, but my dad always told us that this was the original swimming hole right here. Somehow the creek was diverted. I don't know exactly. But this was when it did not have a concrete bottom. It's hard to imagine a public pool with no concrete bottom. I don't know what they had on the bottom besides mud, but it was probably better than not going to the pool. All right, go ahead. This was the original bathhouse that after the first year they found out was too small. This was probably 25 or 26. Okay, and you can see it's basically like a pond. in this area here. A little bit of sand beach and stuff like that. Go on. This is the, I believe, the original bathhouse. Yeah, it says 26 there. Some of these dates were added much later. I rely on my dad. This is my dad's handwriting. I can tell. All right, go ahead. This is the bathhouse, the second bathhouse, the one that burned down under construction. Mrs. Thompson inherited $60,000, and she used most of that money in order to build this new bathhouse. She wanted something kind of a little bit fancier. Go ahead. And there's the new bathhouse, the original diving platform. Notice the car over here? Okay, that's a while ago. Go ahead. Just another view. You can see the shape of the thing. You know, the grass beach right here is original, but there was a higher wall. A lot of things were changed over the years. But again, the cars. These are all 1930s looking vehicles, maybe late 20s.